Hi everyone, Dr. Shook here. Hope you're doing well today. Today I'm really excited to share some information with you about Alzheimer's disease, and in particular, how to improve Alzheimer's by understanding the 6 different subtypes. Now, if you haven't seen any of my other videos, I go over a tremendous amount of information regarding Alzheimer's and the current state of research and literature. This is the information I'm going to share with you is information that I've learned from several different researchers. This particular framework of these different subtypes, which will help you to understand driving processes behind cognitive decline in Alzheimer's, was primarily developed by Dale Bredesen. Dale Bredesen is he's a researcher at UCLA. He's been researching cognitive decline in Alzheimer's for 35 years. In the past 5 years or so, he's published research showing that you can reverse cognitive decline in Alzheimer's using a systems-based approach, which basically is going to look at these factors I'm getting ready to talk to you about and working to reverse engineer if these problems are occurring, address these factors because we know that they contribute to cognitive decline and the negative changes associated with Alzheimer's. So if you can support this, you can improve the physiology, what we call pathophysiology, so the way that the physiology is breaking down that's contributing to Alzheimer's. So you can help to try to unwind it, to slow, halt, or reverse cognitive decline. Now, if you're interested in learning about Dale Bredesen, just go to Amazon or any online retailer or your local bookstore and get The End of Alzheimer's. He wrote this book a year or two ago, and the book is fantastic, and it will go through a lot of this information for you. But I want to share these different subtypes with you here so that you can get an idea of exactly what the known drivers are of cognitive decline in Alzheimer's as we understand them today. We will undoubtedly learn more, but right now these are the things that we understand today based on a tremendous amount of research, and we have Dr. Bredesen and a lot of other researchers to thank for this. So let's go ahead and get started. So there are 6 different subtypes here of Alzheimer's. Okay, this is fantastic. There will probably be more of these before it's all said and done with the research that's ongoing. There are currently, we know, 36 driving factors. These driving factors can all be broken down and segmented into these 6 different subtypes. Okay, so the first subtype is inflammatory. Okay, subtype 1 is inflammatory. Now, inflammatory subtype is really driven by anything that promotes an inflammatory process within the body. Okay, so if you can measure this, guys, you can measure biomarkers like C-reactive protein, homocysteine, you can measure antibodies to see if there's an autoimmune process. There's a lot that you can do to understand if there's an ongoing inflammatory process. Lots of things drive inflammatory processes. Everything from infections, so bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungal infections, to food reactivity, if you eat foods that you have an immune response to chemicals in the environment, to autoimmune conditions. A lot of different things will drive inflammatory processes. And if that is ongoing, then it does create some very negative consequences and changes for the brain. It actually, the inflammatory, everything that we're going to talk about here, these different 36 drivers, okay? 36 drivers. What they do is they trip APP. They flip a molecular switch on the neurons called the amyloid precursor protein. That amyloid precursor protein causes a lot of negative changes to nerve cells throughout the body and the brain. And so chronic inflammation, how many times have you heard someone say that inflammation is the root or driver of all disease processes? I mean, it's cliche, right? We hear it so much, but there's a lot of truth to that. You can't have a chronic inflammatory state in your body or you're going to have some really significant problems long term. You're not going to age well. There's going to be a lot of issues that occur, and we know that the brain is very susceptible. Okay, so anything that drives inflammation. So obviously, you have to check the inflammatory levels. You have to, if you have a high inflammatory load, you have to figure out what's driving it. You have to figure out what's driving it. I'm going to say it a third time. You have to figure out what's driving it. Just the other day, I was working with someone, and I do a lot of distance consulting. I work with people across the U.S., around the world, and we help them to investigate these factors that are promoting cognitive decline, and we help them to get advanced laboratory testing to look further into the biochemical drivers. And I was talking with someone, and she had high inflammatory levels. So we were looking at a marker called high sensitivity C-reactive protein. This marker was elevated. We tested her, and it was elevated. It was 3 or 4 times the lab range. So I think it was at about 10, and it should have been, actually the lab range is 0 to 3. We want to see it at 0.5 or below. Okay, she was at 10. She was very, very high. So I asked her, and we started looking at her, her signs and symptoms, and nothing really stood out as to why she had these. Symptomatically, nothing stood out that was obvious. And so we looked back at some of her blood work, and it has been elevated for 10 years. This is a tragedy. This is something that her doctors checked. And so what I explained to her was, we have to figure out what's driving this. So we need to do diagnostic testing to investigate the factors that could be promoting this. Because you cannot have persistently elevated inflammation, or you're going to have some very, very significant negative consequences to the brain and your systemic health. Okay, so inflammatory. Number 2, actually, 1.5. Now they call this 1.5 because it blends some of the factors of 1 and 2. Okay, now 1.5 is you're probably wondering, what does that word mean? Glycotoxic. All you need to know here is blood sugar. Glycotoxic means blood sugar. Listen, this is really important you understand this, because this is one of the most common factors that promotes cognitive decline. Blood sugar fluctuations. In particular, high blood sugar. High blood sugar creates something called glycosylated end products. Okay, it damages, all you need to understand is that it damages the microvasculature. So it damages your blood vessels. So you can't deliver oxygen and nutrients to the tissues. The nerves then die. That includes your brain. It is toxic to the brain. It also, when your blood sugar is high, you have high insulin, which is the hormone that's its job is to lower blood sugar. Okay, so this is a huge, huge issue because insulin is inflammatory. Remember I said it blends 1 and 2? So I'll tell you about 2 in a second. And you end up not being able to get nutrients delivered to the tissues, and you have some very negative changes to the brain. Now, do you know that in the scientific literature, before I knew this framework, I think actually before this framework was developed, do you know in the scientific literature, I work a lot with people that have diabetes, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, because I work primarily with people that have thyroid problems and autoimmune conditions. And most people that have thyroid problems have an autoimmune thyroid issue. That's why they have the thyroid problem in the first place, because their immune system's attacking the thyroid. So I can tell you this, no one comes in with one problem, right? No one comes in with one problem. Everyone comes in with layers of problems, right? So they might have hypothyroidism and an autoimmune process, and they have type 2 diabetes, and they have digestive tract problems. They've got all of these issues that are contributing and that compound, and that are all all a factor in their health and why they feel the way they feel. So I've worked a lot with people that have diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is the most common form of diabetes in the world, right? That's the type that's adult onset. It's associated with insulin resistance and what we call metabolic syndrome. It is diagnosed with a fasting blood sugar over 127 at 2 different checks, or you have a hemoglobin A1C over 6.4, all this stuff. The main thing is in the scientific literature, I noticed years ago that the researchers were calling, guess what they were calling? They were calling Alzheimer's disease. They were calling Alzheimer's disease in the scientific literature. Let's write it out here. They were calling it type 3 diabetes. They were calling Alzheimer's disease. It's all through the scientific literature. If you go to pubmed.gov, type in type 3 diabetes, and you will see all over hundreds of research papers that show Alzheimer's being called type 3 diabetes. It's all throughout the scientific literature. So blood sugar is a major, major issue. So if someone has Alzheimer's or cognitive decline, and they have high inflammatory load, and they have high blood sugar with high insulin. And we know that there's a lot of negative things happening. So what do? Well, we get them, we change their diet and lifestyle. We search for the cause of the inflammatory process, and we work with them to address it, to treat the problem. Right? You've got to address the problem. The interesting thing is I say, we don't treat, when I work with people, I don't treat anything. So someone could come to me with autoimmune thyroid problems, with an inflammatory bowel condition, they want to lose weight, they could have cognitive decline, they could have Alzheimer's, and I don't treat anything. I don't treat a single thing. What I do is I look at their adaptive biochemistry. We look at what's happening with their body, and we look at what their biochemistry is doing, and we address and we support the biochemistry that is not optimal. So as we go through this, it'll be more apparent like how we can address these things. I'll kind of come back to that concept. But it's important to understand that if you want to put a label on a disease process, you have to understand that disease process has manifested because of underlying biochemical problems that have ultimately led to that. So how do you actually help someone to try and heal their body and regain their health? How do you do that? If someone has a label like Alzheimer's or cognitive decline, well, there's not a pill for that because there are multiple things that have led to this diagnosis that they have. And so you have to look at what's actually happening with their biochemistry and reverse engineer, unwind this process that has ultimately led them there. Okay, so that's when you understand these drivers, it makes more sense. So inflammatory, glycotoxic, number 2, which is actually our third subtype, is atrophic. Okay, atrophic basically means you don't have enough vitamins, minerals, and hormones for the neurons and the nerve cells to stay healthy. Do you know that your brain requires testosterone, it requires estrogen, it requires vitamins and minerals? And this is a huge issue because typically as people get older, they lose the ability to properly concentrate stomach acid and release digestive enzymes. So therefore they can't break their food down. If they can't break their food down, they cannot extract the vitamins and minerals from it to keep the body healthy. This is a major problem. So what do? You look to see, does the person have good vitamin and mineral status? How's their digestion? If they don't have good vitamin and mineral status, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to support optimal vitamin and mineral status. You're going to support optimal digestion. You're going to do all these things to work with them to try and optimize these holes, these problems that are contributing to their cognitive decline and their adaptive biochemistry, right? We're really just supporting, optimal health. Okay, number 3. Toxic. Now, number 3 is really an important one because it looks at biotoxins. Okay, biotoxins, which we're talking mold, Lyme disease. These things put off, they as part of their normal metabolism, they create toxins that they release into your body. So biotoxins. This is huge. Actually, there's a research paper published in, I think it was 2016 or 2017, that identified inhalation-based Alzheimer's disease. Inhalation-based Alzheimer's disease, a completely preventable type of Alzheimer's disease, primarily due to the volatile organic compounds, the VOCs, right? You think about paint, like you paint your walls, you think about VOCs, right? You go to the store and you buy paint and they say, you can buy the low VOC paint. Well, VOCs are also produced by fungi, by mold, and in your home you can actually breathe this in. So inhalation-based Alzheimer's, it's unbelievable. Look it up. Go to pubmed.gov, type in inhalation-based Alzheimer's. Your mind will be blown, and your mind will be blown because none of your doctors know this. You know why? Because they're good people. Do not get me wrong, but they are practicing a model that matches a medication with the issue, and they're going to tell you, if they are aware of it, that there's not enough evidence for them to practice that way. But many of them don't have the option to practice that way, even if they believe it, because they're employees, right? You've got to understand that it's the medical system. So here's the thing. My take on this is we have tremendous amounts of literature. There have already been case studies, and there are thousands of people that are using the process that Dr. Bredesen taught, that I'm a Bredesen qualified practitioner that I use with people, and they are improving their cognitive function. So why wait for people that have a terminal illness. You mean to tell me like this stuff all has value? There's a tremendous amount of scientific literature that supports every bit of this. So what are we waiting on? What are we waiting on? What do we have to lose? You know what? We have nothing to lose. Let's get to work looking at these problems and trying to help these people. You know, that's how I feel about it. I've unfortunately, some doctors are, are very leery of using or encouraging any of this. And to that I say, why? What do you have to lose here? What do you have to lose by looking for sources of inflammation in the person's body? Well, there's no evidence basis for it. Okay, well, so while it's being reversed, and while it has been reversed, cognitive decline and Alzheimer's has been reversed and is being reversed in people around the world using the same process, and we know inflammation's bad anyway, you just want to wait until there's more evidence to tell people to try this? You know, why don't you do what I'm going to show you here? The trial and error things that we can do. You know, if nothing else, say, look, you can't go wrong changing your diet. You can't go wrong using some supplements, which, you know, that's debatable. But your doctors are going to be very, very conservative, and they don't know this stuff. But what are they going to do? Prescribe you one of the 2 medications that have been approved for Alzheimer's that all they do is treat the symptoms? That's not going to cut it. That doesn't cut it. So toxic biotoxins. The toxic category are biotoxins. Also, we're going to talk about metals and chemicals. Metals and chemicals. We'll just leave it at chem. Metals and chemicals. So things like mercury, lead, cadmium, cobalt, these heavy metals. Chemicals. Do you know that there are 85,000 agricultural and industrial chemicals in use today? In our food supply, in everything around us, and all of our electronics, they're off-gassing. And we wonder why we're sick. We wonder why we're sick because the things that we just take for granted, that we just think are, you know, there can't be anything wrong with, the paint on the wall or the tiles on the ceiling or this wrinkle-free stuff on my shirt. That's fine, right? Those are all chemicals, folks. Those chemicals have a physiological impact on your health. So we have to consider these things. And we know that a lot of these chemicals are endocrine disruptors. So they disrupt the hormonal systems. They can trigger an immune response. They are bioaccumulative. They build up in the tissues. They can do a lot of very, very negative things, and they can contribute to cognitive decline. So biotoxins, metals, chemicals, and then also, I do want to say something here about toxic effect, okay? So you can have a hormone, that's terrible, but you can have a hormone that is toxic, okay, that can create major problems, and it is associated with type 3 here. Well, if I could spell it today. Cortisol. Your stress hormone cortisol is neurotoxic. Cortisol, prolonged bouts of stress. So you'll see this. You'll see that some people will develop Alzheimer's after a very prolonged, stressful event, right? So maybe there was a loss of someone in their family, and they grieved for a very long time. It was very difficult to get over. There was a legal matter. There was something that happened that was really life-changing. That prolonged stress will cause nerve cell death in a central part of the brain where your short-term memory is formed, and it's called the hippocampus. And we know that cortisol is neurotoxic, so this is a big issue here. Okay, so toxic. You see, there's a lot of things here, right? And it makes sense if you start looking at this. You say, oh, okay, there's literature that supports every bit of this. So we've got to look at this. Now, the other thing, number 4, CVD, cerebrovascular disease. And I just lump in hypoxia, low oxygen state. Cerebrovascular disease. So you can't get blood, you can't get oxygen, you can't get nutrients to the brain to keep the neurons healthy. Atherosclerosis, peripheral artery disease, anything that prevents blood flow. Cerebrovascular, these are big issues. Right, these are big issues that can lead to cognitive decline. Hypoxia kind of falls into that category, at least I think of it that way, where you have decreased oxygen delivery and maybe it's due to, this is a big one, guys, sleep apnea, upper airway resistance syndrome. I mean, these are things that you should get checked. If you snore, if you have any problems with sleeping, or your loved ones tell you that you're snoring, you have got to get that figured out. You have to. It's critical that you get your maintain oxygen throughout the night, steady oxygen, an oxygenated state. The brain will suffer if you're hypoxic, if your oxygen goes low. Number 5. Traumatic. So basically a history of head injuries, right? So this could be a singular thing that was a very significant impact, or this could be repetitive traumas, like someone that played sports or football their whole life, or they were in contact sports. This traumatic insult to the brain drives an inflammatory process, activates the inflammatory and the immune system within the brain, and it drives a process that will trip and promote amyloid precursor proteins to flip that molecular switch, to flip a certain way that contributes to a lot of the pathophysiological changes that we see in Alzheimer's. So these are all things we have to take into consideration, and you support them all differently. But the reality is that people don't just have one of these. They usually have a blend of all these problems. So what you have to do is you have to look at these issues, and you have to say, okay, what is your mix of these issues and how can we support it? And that's really what we have to do. Now, I'm going to talk to you, I want to share a few things with you. I've explained quite a bit, but I want to share with you a few things that you can do if you're trying to figure this out. So first of all, there are some things that you can do that are trial and error. So number 1, you can consider, now clear this with your doctor, get professional guidance. You can eat a ketogenic diet. Now, the one thing that we know about a ketogenic diet is that the ketogenic diet lowers inflammatory levels, and it raises something called ketones within the body. And the brain works very efficiently off of ketones. So it has been shown to be the favorable diet for most people that have cognitive decline or Alzheimer's. So a ketogenic diet. You can also do intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is when you reduce your window of eating every day to 12 to 8 hours. So you only eat within like a 12 to 8 hour window, and you don't eat 3 hours before bed. This has been shown to be very, very helpful and help people to stay into ketosis. And there's a lot of information that we're learning about the rhythms of the body and enzyme production. For example, when you wake up in the morning, as soon as you eat something that's not, or you drink something that's not water, it triggers your daily rhythm of enzyme production. Okay, so this fasting, when we condense our window of eating, we help to set this rhythm or clock of enzyme production in a way that coincides more with probably what we would have done more prior to our modern civilization and this convenience that we have. This probably more congruent with our physiological state, with an ideal physiological state. There's a guy, you can look into this, Sachin Patel. I think he's also at UCLA, if I'm not mistaken. Sachin Patel is doing research on intermittent fasting. He's the expert. You just definitely look him up, but look into intermittent fasting. I think it's fantastic. And there's a lot of different ways to do intermittent fasting. I love doing intermittent fasting myself. It's very, 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 very helpful for me. And then vitamins and minerals. Remember we talked about atrophic and how some vitamins and minerals are deficient. You could always consider ketogenic diet with intermittent fasting, and then making sure that you're getting adequate vitamins and minerals. And that's a trial and error way to support some of the problems that you might see here. So ketogenic diet could address glycotoxic. Vitamins and minerals could help with the atrophic support, though there's hormones are obviously not going to change there. These are all things that you can do to support numerous biochemical pathways here that would help with maybe a traumatic issue. If there's a chronic inflammatory process, keto is very anti-inflammatory, so food can be medicine. This can definitely be a very, very helpful strategy for a lot of these processes. Now, if you look at this and you're overwhelmed by everything that we've talked about and you'd like some guided assistance, I do work with people around the world and across the United States. All you have to do is go to new www.alzconsult.com, and you can learn all about working with me. If you're just trying to learn and get more information to help someone that you know, and you're still gathering information, we've got a lot of videos out there. You can also pick up Dr. Bredesen's book, and I think it will be very helpful and point you in the right direction. But if there's anything that we can do for you, don't hesitate to let us know. But I appreciate you hanging out with me all this time, and I hope you have a